Today, I'm going to talk about integrating services across Microsoft Cloud to enhance user collaboration. This is a part of this, by the way, before I jump into it, let me introduce myself. If you're new here, my name is Ayça Baş. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, working together with Waldek and Gary in the same team. And today I will talk about how we can do ACS, Azure Communication Services integrations with Microsoft Teams. This session is part of the series. We already done a lot at the beginning of the series. First, my colleague Dan was here to talk about how audio and video calling from a custom app we can bring into a Teams meeting. And the second week, he was here again talking about how we can create Azure Communication Services resource on Azure. And in the third week, he was here showing you integrating Azure Communication Services calling functionality into a React app. Last week, I was here to talk about how we can dynamically create a Microsoft Teams meeting using Microsoft Graph, which was consumed by Azure Communication Services as well as by the client side of the user on Microsoft Teams. And today I will be talking about how we can dynamically create an Azure Communication Services identity and token. And last week, which will be next week, then we'll be here back again talking how we can deploy our app to Azure. If you're interested in learning more about our series, all of the videos are available in our community channel. You can go ahead and check out the video separately. And I will jump into dynamically creating an Azure Communication Services identity and token for this week. Before we start talking about the code and everything, I just want to show you what we're talking about here. This is a customer viewpoint. We created a React app which consumes Azure Communication Services. As a customer, they can join the customer meeting through React. And the point they send the request, there will be a Teams meeting created on the client's calendar. Client will use Microsoft Teams interface to join the meeting, and both client and the customer will meet in the same meeting, even though customer is joining from React app and client, the customer agent will be joining from Microsoft Teams. So they both meet in the same meeting by consuming Microsoft Teams URL, which we covered last week, how we can create the meeting link dynamically. So this week, we will be focusing on dynamically creating an Azure Communication Services identity and token. This will be under the React Azure Communication Services and connection with Azure Functions. So we are creating the token for our client, which we don't ask any login, any permissions from the client side. But of course, for all the clients, we need some sort of a user token for them to join the meeting through Azure Communication Services. As a customer agent, we will be using Teams, Microsoft Teams as an interface. So we will know about the customer agent because they will be consuming Teams. We will have their identity. But for the client, every time when they try to join the meeting, we will need ID and the token from their side. So we will know that the same individual is trying to join the call and maybe trying to recall as well. That will help us for the Azure Communication Services bit in the React app. So let's quickly take a look how we're going to do that. It's really straightforward. We are making this dynamic ACS identity and token call from another Azure functions. We've seen how to call Microsoft Graph from Azure Functions last week. This week, we will be covering another Azure Functions where we are calling ACS Identity Client. What we are doing here is we create a function and then we get ACS connection string from the code. In our code, we are using connection string. We are putting in the .env file, but you can also get that from Azure directly as well. Once you get the connection string, the only thing you do is just calling the communication identity client to create user identity and token. And once you create your user, we are basically returning the user details to back to our React app, so our ACS app will be working. This function will be triggered the moment when our client starts the app. The moment they go to the URL, this function will be triggered and will be returned with the user ID and the token, and our user will be able to join the meeting with the newly created identity and token. I want to quickly show you how we do that in our code. Let's quickly go to our code and then I will run the app. First of all, if you joined the previous sessions in the community call, you may realize we've been going through the same app in the past 5 weeks. This week, we will be focusing on last week, we covered Teams meeting function. This week, we will be focusing on ACSTokenFunction. Here's our function under the server TypeScript, and we will be calling that function from app.tsx, which is under the client React app. So basically, the moment when we render the app UI, we are calling these two functions, one that we've seen last week, and this one we will be covering this week. So the moment we render the UI, we are calling React app ACS user function, which will be, let's go to .env file, which will be localhost 7071 API ACSTokenFunction. It's exactly our function mentioned here. And when we call that in the UI, our function will be triggered. And as I showed in the slides as well, we will be first getting the connection string, which is again in the .env file. And after that, we will create token client by using communication identity client. And this requires the connection string from ACS. You can create this connection string on Azure portal and then cover that part in, I think, 2 weeks before. So you can go check out that video. Once we create the token, then we can create our user with the token client. And after that, the only thing we will return as a body will be user ID. User ID will be consumed here when setting up the meeting. And by using this user ID, our React app will be understanding who's this user. We will be creating user ID and token every time a new user joins the session and every time when they want to make a call with our customer agent. So I want to see that in action. Yeah, okay, here is my taskbar. I want to see that in action. Let's open the browser. My React app is running at the moment, and as well as my functions, both of the functions are working. Today, we will be focusing on the ACS user function. Let's go to localhost 3000. And the moment when I hit this UI, it's initializing, meaning that it is creating a new token and the ID for me. And I can quickly show up here. Hi, everyone. And here, I already have the ID and the token. When I click on start the call, my ID and the token will be consumed by ACS, and I will be joining the meeting with my newly created ID and the token, and I can start connecting with the customer agent. So this is pretty much it, and all these samples and details are available for you if you're interested in trying this demo out by yourself. Here are the resources. If I need to quickly go through the resources, the first one is aka.ms/Microsoft-Cloud. You can find more integrations about Microsoft Cloud there. If you're interested in this particular tutorial, you can go through the step-by-step tutorial by just going to aka.ms/mscloud-acs-teams-tutorial. This will be guiding you to step-by-step tutorial for this workshop specifically. We have a samples repo on GitHub. We also have the Azure Communication Services UI library, which will be super useful if you're interested in using ACS. If you're interested in creating a React app, let's say, you can use the UI library to create something like I showed a couple minutes back. And if you're new to Azure Functions and interested in what kind of functions do we have in this example, I've shown you HTTP trigger, but there are more available in Azure functions. You can go and check out aka.ms/ms Azure-functions. And Graph was the topic for last week, but you will see, if you complete this tutorial, you will see it plays a huge role in this workshop as well. If you're interested in learning more about Microsoft Graph, you can check out aka.ms/ge, or you can join Hack Together to learn more about Graph. This is all I wanted to cover today. If you have any questions, I will be in the chat. I can answer your questions and hand over to Gary. And he has an exciting topic to cover.
Thank you, Ayça. Really, really cool, awesome stuff, and it's so simple. So really, really cool. Great work on the demos as well.